Know your place. I own this plane. I can buy your entire bloodline.
The cabin was silent except for the sound of a single slap. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there in the first-class aisle of the Boeing 777, her hand pressed against her cheek, as a man worth $17 billion leaned over and whispered in her ear. "Know your place," Victor Stone said. "I own this plane. I own this airline. I could buy your entire bloodline before we land." Those 10 words would be the last mistake of his life. Because what Victor Stone did not know, what his private investigators failed to uncover, what his billions could not protect him from, was that the quiet flight attendant standing before him had a brother. And that brother was not a pilot. He was not a lawyer. He was not a politician. Jack Crowe was something far more dangerous. Jack Crowe was a ghost with a ledger, and he had just added Victor Stone's name to it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story is not about a single slap on a single flight from JFK to Los Angeles. This story is about a system designed to protect men like Victor Stone, men who believe their wealth is a shield against consequence. Victor Stone was the founder of Stone Capital, a private equity firm that swallowed struggling companies whole and left thousands of workers without pensions. He was 54 years old with a mansion in Greenwich, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a reputation for cruelty that his PR team worked overtime to bury. He had been sued 23 times for workplace harassment and had settled every single case with a check and a non-disclosure agreement. He believed money could solve any problem. He was about to discover that some problems cannot be solved because some problems have names and some names have brothers. Sarah was 29 years old when she encountered Victor Stone. She was a former Air Force medic who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles while enemy fire shredded the air around her. She had seen death up close. She had held the hands of dying men and lied to them, telling them they would see their families again. After leaving the military, she became a flight attendant for a major American airline. Not because she needed the money, but because she loved the sky and the quiet dignity of taking care of people. Her brother Jack was her only remaining family. Their parents had died in a car accident when Sarah was 19 and Jack was 22, and from that moment forward they had been each other's anchor. Jack had joined the Army after college, serving 12 years in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, where he specialized in war crimes prosecution. He had put warlords in handcuffs. He had built cases against men who thought themselves untouchable because they commanded militias and controlled diamond mines. When Jack left the military, he did not become a corporate lawyer. He opened a small investigative firm that no one had ever heard of, a firm that served only one type of client: people who had been crushed by the powerful and had nowhere else to turn. The flight from JFK to Los Angeles was routine. Victor Stone was in 1A, as always, drinking champagne from a glass he required to be stemmed crystal. He had already insulted 2 flight attendants for being too slow. He had demanded that the pilot personally come to his seat to explain a 30-minute ground delay. The captain, a veteran with 26 years of experience, refused to leave the cockpit, and Victor Stone made a phone call to the airline CEO, a man whose salary Victor's firm indirectly controlled. Within minutes, the captain received a message from corporate: accommodate the passenger. That is the world Victor Stone lived in, a world where a single phone call could override safety protocols and intimidate a veteran captain. Sarah watched all of this from the galley. She recognized the type. She had seen it in Afghanistan. Officers who treated enlisted men as furniture, contractors who believed their money bought them immunity. She told herself to stay professional, to ignore the rage building in her chest, to remember that she had survived real danger, and this man was merely an inconvenience. The moment came during drink service. Turbulence had forced the captain to turn on the seatbelt sign, and Sarah was making a final pass through the cabin to ensure everyone was secured. Victor Stone had unbuckled his belt and was standing, stretching his legs, his phone pressed to his ear. Sarah approached him and said the words she had said 1,000 times before. "Sir, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. For your safety, I need you to take your seat." Victor Stone did not hang up the phone. He did not acknowledge her. He continued his conversation, discussing the acquisition of a Midwestern manufacturing company, a deal that would put 3,000 people out of work. Sarah waited 30 seconds and repeated herself, this time touching his arm gently to get his attention. That is when Victor Stone turned, his face twisting into an expression of pure contempt, and slapped her across the face with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the galley cart. The passengers in first class froze. A teenager in 3C started recording on his phone, and Victor Stone sat down, buckled his belt, and said, "Now I'm seated. Happy." The video was online within an hour. It showed everything. The slap, the stumble, the billionaire casually returning to his seat, as if he had done nothing more remarkable than swat a fly. The airline's initial response was a masterpiece of corporate cowardice. They issued a statement saying they were investigating the incident and that passenger safety was their top priority. Victor Stone's lawyers were already negotiating, offering Sarah $100,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. They offered $200,000. They offered $500,000. Sarah refused every offer. She wanted Victor Stone to stand in a courtroom and explain why he believed he had the right to put his hands on a flight attendant. She wanted a jury of ordinary Americans to look at a billionaire and tell him that his money meant nothing. She did not know that her brother Jack had already started working. She did not know that before Victor Stone's plane even touched down in Los Angeles, Jack Crowe had already made 3 phone calls that would change everything. Jack did not call Sarah after the video went viral. He did not need to. He had seen the footage within minutes, and he had felt a cold, familiar calm settle over him. This was not anger. Anger was for people who did not know what to do. Jack knew exactly what to do because he had done it before, in courtrooms in The Hague, in depositions in Washington, in negotiations with men who commanded armies. He opened a file on Victor Stone, a file that already existed because men like Victor Stone always leave trails and always make mistakes. Jack had spent 15 years building a network of sources, former employees, disgruntled partners, whistleblowers who had been silenced by non-disclosure agreements. He started making phone calls at 11 p.m. the night of the flight. He called a federal prosecutor who owed him a favor. He called a journalist at the Wall Street Journal who had been trying to break a story on Stone Capital for 3 years. He called the chief financial officer of Victor's largest investor, a man who had secretly been feeding Jack information for months. By midnight, the trap was set. Victor Stone landed in Los Angeles at 8:47 p.m. He went straight to the Four Seasons, ordered a bottle of expensive champagne, and posted a photo of himself on social media with the caption, "Another day, another victory." He had no idea that his empire was already cracking. He went to sleep that night believing that his lawyers would handle the slap story and that by Monday morning the whole thing would be forgotten. He woke up at 6:15 a.m. to a phone that would not stop ringing. 47 missed calls. 230 text messages. His chief of staff had been trying to reach him for 3 hours. Victor called him back and heard the words that would change his life forever. The Journal is running a front-page story this morning. They have affidavits from 7 former employees. They have bank records showing the offshore accounts. They have everything. The prosecutors are already reviewing the evidence. And all 3 of our major investors just pulled their funding. Everything happened overnight. We don't know how. We don't know who. But everything is falling apart. Victor Stone sat on the edge of his hotel bed, his phone pressed to his ear, unable to speak for a full 10 seconds. His mind raced backward, retracing every step of the last 24 hours. He had flown from New York to Los Angeles. He had drunk champagne. He had made a phone call to the airline CEO. He had argued with a flight attendant. He had slapped her. He remembered the slap clearly now, the way her head turned, the way she did not cry. But that was nothing. That was a minor irritation, a moment of justified frustration. He had already instructed his lawyers to offer her money. She would sign the papers by Monday. So why was his empire collapsing? He ran through the list of his enemies. There were dozens. Competitors he had crushed. Partners he had betrayed. Employees he had fired. Any one of them could be behind the leaked affidavits and the frozen accounts. But all of them were weak. All of them had already lost. Victor Stone did not lose to weak people. He could not connect the disaster to the slap because the slap was beneath his consideration. She was just a flight attendant. What could she possibly do? He said it out loud to the empty hotel room. It can't be her. She's nobody. He said it again, as if repeating the words would make them true. She was a woman who poured coffee and asked passengers to fasten their seatbelts. She had no power, no connections, no money. Victor had crushed people with far more resources than her. He had destroyed executives, bankrupted companies, ruined families. One flight attendant with a red cheek could not possibly have triggered a federal investigation and a Wall Street Journal expose in a single night. It was impossible. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that the timing was too perfect. The slap happened at 8 p.m. By 11 p.m., his investors were pulling out. By 6 a.m., the Journal had a front-page story. Someone had moved faster than Victor had ever seen anyone move. Someone had known exactly where to strike. Victor pushed the thought away. He did not have time to chase ghosts. He had an empire to save. He picked up his phone and called his head of security. He was entering fight mode. He would find the person responsible, crush them, and then go back to enjoying his champagne. That was what Victor Stone always did. He always won. But even as he made that call, even as his voice returned to its usual commanding tone, a single image kept flickering in his mind. The face of the flight attendant. Not her fear, her calm. She had looked at him the way a soldier looks at a civilian who does not understand what war really means. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of men who had nothing left to lose. He told himself he was imagining things. He told himself to focus. He made the call. And then he began the fight that would destroy him. The fight he thought he would win. The fight he had already lost before it began. He hung up on his chief of staff and called his head of security, a former CIA officer named Dante who had handled problems for Victor for 12 years. Find out who leaked those records, Victor said. I don't care what it costs. I want a name by noon. Dante started working. By 9 in the morning, he had traced the leaks to a former Stone Capital vice president named Robert Chun, a man Victor had fired 5 years earlier for asking too many questions about offshore accounts. Victor smiled. Robert Chun was weak. Robert Chun had a wife, 2 children, and a mortgage. Victor sent 2 men to Robert's house in Connecticut. They arrived at 10 a.m., knocked on the door, and politely informed Robert that if he did not recant his affidavit, his wife would lose her job at a bank Victor secretly controlled. Robert signed a recantation within an hour. Victor celebrated with another glass of champagne. He thought he had won. But Jack Crowe had anticipated this. Jack knew that Victor would go after the witnesses. That was what bullies always did. So Jack had already recorded every conversation Robert Chun had with Victor's men. The recording captured the threat to Robert's wife. It captured Robert's trembling voice as he signed the recantation. And at 11 a.m., Jack sent that recording to the federal prosecutor handling the case. Within 2 hours, Victor's 2 men were arrested for witness intimidation. Victor himself was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a new federal complaint. The judge added a no-contact order preventing Victor from communicating with any witness in the case. Victor Stone had tried to fight back, and his fight had made everything worse. He screamed at Dante. He fired Dante. He called his lawyers and demanded they get the no-contact order lifted. The lawyers told him it was impossible. For the first time in his life, Victor Stone heard the word impossible and could not make it disappear. Victor tried a different approach. He decided to move his money. He had $3 billion in offshore accounts, spread across the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. If he could transfer those funds before the courts froze them, he could hire an army of lawyers and fight for years. He called his Swiss banker at 2 p.m. The banker, a man named Klaus who had handled Victor's money for a decade, answered with a strange hesitation in his voice. Mr. Stone, I am afraid I cannot process any transfers at this time. Your accounts have been flagged by an international financial monitoring agency. I do not know who filed the report, but the freeze is effective immediately. Victor slammed his phone against the wall. He called the Cayman Islands. Same answer. He called Singapore. Same answer. Jack Crowe had filed simultaneous reports with every financial crimes unit in every jurisdiction where Victor held money. Jack had done this at 4 a.m. while Victor was still asleep. By the time Victor woke up, the money was already locked. Victor had fought back, and Jack had already won the fight before Victor even knew there was a battle. The final blow of Victor's blind fight came on Saturday morning. He had one last card to play. He called the governor of New York, a man whose election campaign Victor had funded with $5 million. The governor owed him. Victor asked for a favor. I need you to call the U.S. Attorney's office and tell them to slow down the investigation. Just give me a week to get my lawyers together. The governor was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Victor, I got a call yesterday from a man I've never met. He identified himself only as a former federal prosecutor. He told me that if I interfered in this case, he would release the recordings of every conversation we had about the campaign finance violations from 2018. I don't know how he got those recordings, but I am not making that call, and I am returning your $5 million. Do not contact me again. The line went dead. Victor Stone dropped his phone. He had been wealthy. He had been powerful. He had been untouchable. And now, in less than a week, he had been reduced to a man who could not even call the governor he had bought and paid for. He still had no idea who was doing this to him. On Saturday afternoon, Victor's personal investigator, a man he had hired separately from the now-fired Dante, finally delivered a name. The investigator had been digging through the financial monitoring reports, tracing the source of the frozen accounts and the leaked documents. He walked into Victor's penthouse with a tablet and a pale face. "We found him," the investigator said. "His name is Jack Crowe. He runs a small investigative firm out of Virginia. No website, no staff listed, no social media. But he's the one who filed the reports with the financial crimes units. He's the one who provided the affidavits to the Journal. He's the one who's been feeding evidence to the federal prosecutor." Victor grabbed the tablet and stared at the photograph on the screen. It showed a man in his mid-30s, plain clothes, unremarkable face, standing next to a woman. Victor's blood ran cold. The woman was Sarah, the flight attendant, the woman he had slapped. He zoomed in on the photograph, hoping he was mistaken. He was not. Sarah and Jack Crowe had the same eyes, the same jawline. They were siblings. Victor Stone threw the tablet across the room. It shattered against the wall. His hands were shaking. His mind raced back to the slap, to the look on Sarah's face, to her calm refusal to cry. He remembered thinking she was nobody. He remembered telling himself that a flight attendant could not possibly destroy him. But he had been wrong. She was not nobody. She was the sister of a man who had spent 15 years building a weapon against predators like Victor. A man who had access to federal prosecutors, Wall Street journalists, and financial intelligence networks. A man who had waited for the right moment to strike, and Victor had handed him that moment with a single slap. Victor sank into his chair, his face gray. He whispered to himself, it was her. It was always her. He had spent the last 6 days fighting ghosts, intimidating witnesses, moving money, calling in favors. And all along, the architect of his destruction was the quiet flight attendant he had dismissed as beneath his notice. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe right now because the best part is coming. Victor Stone just found out who destroyed him. What he does next will shock you. Stay with me. His reaction was not immediate anger. It was a crushing realization that his arrogance had blinded him. But then the anger came. It boiled up from his chest, hot and violent. He had been brought down by a flight attendant and her invisible brother. He, Victor Stone, who had crushed CEOs and politicians, was being destroyed by a woman who poured coffee. He could not accept it. He would not accept it. He decided to strike back at the source. If Sarah was the sister, then Sarah was the weakness. He called a private investigator in Los Angeles, a man known for operating in gray areas. "I need you to follow someone," Victor said. "A flight attendant named Sarah. I want to know where she lives, where she works, who she talks to. I want her to feel watched. I want her to be afraid." The investigator agreed to do the job for $50,000. He started following Sarah on Sunday morning. He took photos of her leaving her apartment, buying groceries, visiting a coffee shop. By Monday, Victor had a dossier on Sarah's daily routine. He felt powerful again. He felt in control. But Jack Crowe was always 3 steps ahead. On Monday evening, the private investigator called Victor with a shaking voice. "Mr. Stone, I'm terminating our agreement. I'm returning your money. And I'm deleting every photo I took." Victor demanded to know why. The investigator said, "Because 2 hours ago, a man sat down next to me in my own car while I was parked outside Sarah's apartment. I never heard him open the door. I never saw him approach. He showed me a photograph of my daughter at her school. He said, 'If you follow her again, I will show this same photograph to your wife, along with the evidence of your affair with your secretary.' Then he got out of the car and disappeared. I don't know who he was, but I'm not working for you anymore." Victor slammed his phone down. He had tried to intimidate Sarah, and Jack had countered before the first photo was even developed. Victor had lost again. He sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the wall, finally understanding that he could not win. The man who had never lost a battle in his life had been defeated by a brother's love. The arrest happened on Tuesday morning. Victor Stone was at his Greenwich mansion, eating a plate of eggs and reading the Wall Street Journal, when 6 FBI agents knocked on his door. They did not knock politely. They used a battering ram, splintering the oak frame of his front entrance, because they had obtained a warrant based on evidence that Victor Stone was a flight risk and might attempt to destroy classified documents. Victor Stone was handcuffed in his bathrobe on the front steps of his mansion while his neighbors watched from their driveways. He was charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and witness tampering, charges that carried a maximum sentence of 45 years in federal prison. The prosecutor at the press conference mentioned that the investigation had been aided by a private citizen who wished to remain anonymous. Victor Stone did not need to ask who that private citizen was. He already knew. He knew her name was Sarah, and he knew her brother was Jack Crowe, the ghost who had buried him. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury was composed of 9 women and 3 men, people who had worked as teachers, bus drivers, and retail managers. They looked at Victor Stone, and they saw a man who had spent his entire life believing that the rules did not apply to him. They saw a man who had slapped a flight attendant because she asked him to follow safety regulations. They saw a man who had tried to buy his way out of trouble, not once, but dozens of times. And they decided, in less than 4 hours of deliberation, that Victor Stone was guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison, ordered him to pay $87 million in restitution, and told him, "Your wealth does not make you above the law. It makes you a more dangerous criminal." Sarah did not attend the sentencing. She was working a flight from Chicago to London, serving coffee to a plane load of passengers who had no idea that the woman handing them napkins had brought down one of the most powerful men in American finance. She had not asked for any of this. She had not wanted revenge. She had simply refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement, refused to take the money, refused to pretend that being slapped by a billionaire was just part of the job. Her brother Jack had done the rest, not because Sarah asked him to, but because Jack Crowe had spent his entire adult life building a weapon against men like Victor Stone, and the flight attendant's brother finally had a target worth firing at. Jack still runs his small investigative firm. He still does not advertise. He still serves one type of client. And somewhere in federal prison, Victor Stone sits in a cell and wonders what would have happened if he had simply fastened his seatbelt when a flight attendant asked him to. Today, Victor Stone has served 4 years of his 18-year sentence. He has been denied parole twice. His former friends do not visit. His former wife has remarried. His former company, Stone Capital, was dissolved 2 years after his arrest. The thousands of workers he laid off over the years still remember his name, but they no longer fear it. They tell stories about him now, stories that end with the same punchline. He slapped the wrong flight attendant. Victor Stone hears those stories, even in prison. The guards tell them. The other inmates tell them. Victor Stone is no longer a billionaire. He is a cautionary tale. And the only thing he thinks about, the only thing that keeps him awake at night, is the face of the woman he slapped. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stood there, her hand on her cheek, and looked at him with those calm, steady eyes. The slap lasted half a second. The consequence will last a lifetime. Sarah still calls Jack every Sunday evening. They talk for an hour, sometimes 2. They talk about fishing and football and the weather. They never talk about Victor Stone. There is no need. Victor Stone is a closed chapter, a bad memory that has been filed away and locked in a drawer. What remains is something simpler and more precious. 2 siblings who lost their parents too young, who survived war and loss and loneliness, who built lives that would have made their mother and father proud. Sarah has a small apartment near the airport. Jack has his house in Virginia. They see each other 3 or 4 times a year, usually at the graves of their parents, where they leave flowers and tell stories about the old days. Neither of them is rich. Neither of them is famous. But both of them are free, and freedom is something that Victor Stone will never understand. He thought freedom meant the ability to do anything he wanted without consequence. He was wrong. Freedom means the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you have never slapped someone who could not slap you back. Sarah and Jack have that freedom. Victor Stone does not. This concludes the story of the arrogant billionaire who slapped a flight attendant and had no idea who her brother was. Jack Crowe is not finished. There are always more predators. There are always more people who believe that wealth and power make them immune to consequence. And there is always a brother watching from the shadows, waiting for the next man to make the same mistake Victor Stone made. Thank you for watching. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if someone hurt your sister? Because your answer might be the most important thing you ever write.